皆様こんにちは。EducationUSA 東京の市川です。本日は身体障害のある方のアメリカ留学ということで、セッションの方を開始させていただきます。はじめに EducationUSA について簡単にご説明させていただきます。EducationUSA はアメリカの国務省教育文化局の支援を受けたセンターで、世界に数百のセンターがございます。アメリカの大学院留学に関する最新で正確、公正な情報提供と相談を受け付けております。日本のEducationUSAセンターはアメリカ大使館、領事館を拠点としておりまして、EducationUSA東京はアメリカ大使館と日米教育委員会の共同運営となっております。それでは、早速ですけれども、本日の、流れをご紹介します。まずはじめに、モビリティインターナショナルのアシュリーさんから、アメリカで障害のある方が留学するというのの全般的なお話をしていただきます。その後、12時25分くらいから、カリフォルニア州立大学の、サンバーナディーノ校の、クリスティーナさんと、ごめんなさい、お名前書いていないんですが、レベッカさんのお二人から、お話をしていただきます。一つの大学の例として、お話を聞いていただければと思います。それでは、アシュリーにマイクを渡したいと思いますが、スライド切り替えますので少々お待ちください。So Ashley, please start your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Atsuko. And hello, everyone. My name is Ashley from Mobility International USA. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you, and thanks for being here. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon, in the United States, where right now it is the autumn, and all of the trees are looking very splendid right now, including some Japanese maples, and I have some leaves here in my backyard that I'm holding up. And you know, I wanted just to, I'm so excited to talk about this topic of disability access and opportunities for students with disabilities from around the world to access higher education in the United States. And I'm here from an organization called Mobility International USA. We just call it MIUSA for short. And I'd like to first start with a couple of short profiles, short stories about different international students who came from Japan to the United States for studying, and these students who have different types of disabilities. And the reason why I wanted to start with this is because a very common question that people ask to our staff at MIUSA is, if I have a disability, can I study in the United States? And we of course say yes, definitely, regardless of what type of disability you have. And next slide, please. So I'm starting with, I have some photos here of an international student from Japan named Shuhei, who studied at a community college in Hawaii in the United States. And Shuhei has a physical disability and uses a motorized wheelchair. And he also worked with a personal assistant while he was in the United States to assist him with everyday living needs. He said, "My greatest challenge was my greatest accomplishment." And by that, he meant there were a lot of challenging times of studying in the United States when things were difficult, but altogether, the experience meant a lot to him and was really important for him in a lot of different ways, including his academic goals. And you can see on the right, in the photo on the right, he's accepting his diploma. And on the left, he's in a group with a bunch of friends from his college and host community. Next slide, please. Nozomi Iwai was also an international student. Nozomi was a musician who plays the piano. Nozomi's also blind and studied music at Texas Christian University in the United States. Nozomi said, "I love music. When I play, I feel like music gives me some kind of energy. I feel my life is with music forever." And in these photos, one is Nozomi competing at a piano competition in the United States. And in the bottom photo, it's taken from a video, actually, that's available on YouTube. But in the video, Nozomi is walking around her host campus, her school in Texas, and she's using a white cane to navigate so she can know where she's going. And with her, there's another student who's walking around with her, wanting to experience what it's like to attend school as an international student. Next slide, please. Now, I want everyone to know that when we're talking about disabilities, we're not just talking about the types of disabilities that you can see, like if someone uses a wheelchair or is blind and uses a cane. There are a lot of types of disabilities that you cannot see. For example, Mayuko, who's in these pictures, has some non-apparent disabilities that affect, the way that she learns or remembers things. And she studied at a university in Pennsylvania in the United States. And her advice to other international students is to succeed at your own pace. And she said that because, she struggled sometimes in the academics because it would just go very fast, very quickly. But she was very passionate about her studies and in the sciences. And so she decided that she was just going to work at her own pace. And in these photos, in one of these photos, she's working in a science laboratory. And in the other photo, she's sitting in front of a sign that's in English and Spanish called the Darwin Research Center, because she did a lot of research. Next slide, please. Just a couple of more stories I'd like to share. One, Yasushi, who is on the autism spectrum, and he decided he wanted to learn more about disability. And so he took disability studies at Syracuse University in New York in the United States. And he learned a lot about himself. He learned a lot about stereotypes about autism. And what was very significant to him is that he could help defy some of those stereotypes, dispel some of those stereotypes. He said, "I have learned through my experiences that patience and effort pay off." Next slide. And so I also wanted to share that in addition to universities and colleges across the US, any college or university in the United States is an option for students with disabilities. And any major field of study is an option for students with disabilities. So you're not required to study disability. If you're interested in languages or music or science, you can study any of those things. But some students do choose to study disability studies. Likewise, any disabled student can attend any college or university. Some might choose universities that have a large population of students with disabilities. For example, there are some universities and colleges in the United States that have a large population of deaf students. And often they might communicate in sign language, but they communicate in other ways too. So some examples of schools in the United States that cater to a deaf community include Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., Rochester in New York, and California State Northridge in California. And so there are different advantages to choosing a school with a significant disability community. And just like there are different advantages to choosing any other university. There's one deaf student named Manako who attended one of these colleges that have a large number of deaf students, who said, majoring in deaf studies helped me to understand my deaf experience and identity. So that could be one potential advantage to attending a school with a large community of deaf or other types of students with disabilities. And in these photos, on the left, there's a photo of a faculty member at Gallaudet. And the faculty, most of the faculty at Gallaudet University are also deaf. So not just the students, but the instructors as well. And on the right photo, there's a group, there's an advertisement encouraging students to come learn about Japanese deaf culture. So sometimes you get a chance to meet, depending on your interests, connect with deaf cultures in other parts of the world too, or students with disabilities. Next slide, please. I received a question in advance about students with intellectual disabilities and whether they can access higher education in the United States. And the answer is yes. In the United States, there's a growing movement of programs, over 300 programs, in fact, hosted at different US colleges and universities, are designed to support students with intellectual disabilities. And what makes them unique is that the students with intellectual disabilities are learning right alongside students without disabilities. They're living on campus. They're participating in campus community activities. And so they receive maybe some specific supports. They might have some mentors or tutors or people to assist them, to kind of coach them, encourage them. And I don't have any examples of international students from Japan yet, but I do have an example of a student who came from Sweden, a student who has Down syndrome, and she wanted to study in the United States, just like her sister did. And so she attended a transition program at one college, and there she was able to take computer science, history, and she especially liked being able to improve her English and getting the chance to be independent. So if that's a program that's of interest to you, check out an organization called Think College, and you can learn more about that, or I'd be happy to talk more about that. Next slide, please. So at the organization that I come from, MyUSA, we work with the US Department of State, which is the same entity that sponsors EducationUSA. But our work with the State Department is to be able to run a project called the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. We just call it NCDE for short, or the Clearinghouse. And what this project is our mission is to increase the participation of students with disabilities in international exchange between the United States and around the world. So, and that includes wanting to encourage people with disabilities in other countries to come study in the United States at a college or university. But we also encourage people with disabilities to come to the US for professional exchange programs or sports programs, the arts, volunteering. There's so many different opportunities. Some of those opportunities are sponsored by the State Department. Of course, there are many others besides that. And so that is a project that we do at MyUSA. Next slide, please. And anyone can contact us. You're definitely welcome to contact NCDE and MyUSA, and I'll share contact information later. But here are some reasons why you might want to contact us. One is that we offer different free resources, so you don't have to pay for us to share these with you, and services about disability inclusion and international exchange. You can ask us questions. You can visit our website. On our website, we have a lot of different online tip sheets. Those students that I talked about earlier, we have stories about them in which they describe their experiences. What was it like studying in the United States as an international student with a disability? Well, come read our stories and you'll learn more about what it was like. And then we also have some online magazines. One example that I have pictured here was a special issue on international students with disabilities and their stories about studying in the United States. Next slide, please. So I said you can ask us questions. Let me give you some examples of what kinds of questions people often ask us. Sometimes they say, hi, I'm a person with a disability from Pakistan, Cameroon, India, all around the world. We get questions. They might say, I have a disability. Which universities in the United States can disabled people attend? And again, if hopefully you remember the answer, yes. People with disabilities can attend any university or college in the United States, potentially. They also want to know, am I required to disclose my disability? They sometimes ask, what if I need some disability-related assistance while I'm in the United States? How can I receive disability-related accommodations, either in my classes or maybe just to take the TOEFL or other admission tests? And they also ask, or maybe we wish they would ask, what rights do international students have, international students with disabilities have while they're in the United States? So these are all really common questions, and we have tried our best to put together some answers on our website. Of course, I'd be happy to discuss these answers, but for now, I'll continue to the next slide. One message that I want to share is that disability is really diverse. So we talked about how there are some types of disabilities that you can see. We might call those apparent disabilities. There's also a lot of non-apparent disabilities. For example, some people have their disabilities affect how they're able to learn or remember information or communicate, all sorts of different things. And then, at least in the United States and a lot of other places around the world, a lot of people with disabilities think of disability as part of an identity, part of themselves, part of diversity. So in the United States, we talk a lot about wanting diverse students, which means students who have a lot of different experiences, come from different places around the world. And we think that disability is an important part of that diversity. And so more and more higher education institutions want to make sure that students with disabilities can access their education. Next slide, please. There's a lot of different types of topics that if you're an international student coming to another country and you want to know about disability, you might have questions about what are some of the disability laws in that country, what rights do people have. Disability culture and community is a really important topic, because if you're an international student, not only will you belong to the international student community, but if you choose to, you could potentially also get involved with the disability community and learn about disability culture and US disability culture. There are, a wide range of different types of disabilities in the United States. Some of them might be familiar to you, some might not be. There's a lot of discussion around independent living and how can you, in the United States, there's a real emphasis on how can people with disabilities live as independently as possible, which means they can make decisions for themselves about what they want to do or where they want to go. It doesn't mean you can't get help. It just means that you are in charge of the type of help that you want or need. And then, of course, there's a lot of different types of disability accommodations and different types of technology that people with disabilities sometimes use to do all sorts of things. Next slide, please. So my guests, my co-presenters will likely talk a little bit more about some common types of disability-related accommodations. But just to summarize, sometimes these types of services could include extended time that you receive on your exams or homework. Some people, depending on what type of disability, might need some quiet room to be able to do their exams. Some people might receive note-taking assistance. So, for example, one job that I had when I worked at a university was I took notes for deaf and hard of hearing students who wanted to be able to access notes so they could kind of follow the conversation more easily. But that's just one example of a disability accommodation. There's a myth that students have to pay for their own disability-related accommodations. But you might be surprised to find that many disability-related services are provided by the university or college at no additional charge to the disabled student. It's usually covered by student fees and things like that. But it's a good idea to check with the college or university. Next slide, please. And I know I just have a little bit of time left. You know, we talked about some different disability culture in the United States versus in other countries. And I talked about independence. I think there's a lot of international students worry, well, if you're in the United States and there's so much emphasis on independence, does that mean that no one will help you if you need it? But instead, what usually happens is that Americans don't want to assume that you need help until that person asks for it. So usually most people are more than willing to be helpful, but they just want to make sure that the person with a disability expresses that or communicates that before they offer any assistance. And that's just part of the that respect for independence and privacy and autonomy. And sometimes international students with disabilities will find that they need less assistance in the United States than they do at home. It really depends. Next slide, please. Again, my co-presenters will talk about different campus resources, but you can usually offer, you can sometimes receive disability-related services such as tutoring or counseling or technology through your Disability Resource Center. There might be different offices for counseling or tutoring. And of course, your Advisors and International Student Office can assist as well. Next slide, please. A lot of people with disabilities, not just on your campus, but you can also access some disability services off campus in your host community. One thing to keep in mind is Centers for Independent Living. Take note of that. These are organizations that are run by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. And you can find them all over the United States in different cities. And chances are that wherever in the United States you go, you won't be very far from a Center for Independent Living, and they can connect you to some additional services that your university might not be able to. It's also a great way to meet other disabled people in the community if that's something that's interesting to you. And then you can also contact us at NCDE if you would just like to maybe be connected with other students, including international students who share your disability, if you just want to know what that's like or want to talk to somebody who's done it. Next slide, please. Let's go to one more slide, please. All right, so once you've been admitted, what'll happen is you'll usually contact disability services to discuss what kinds of accommodations or services you might, that will help you succeed. And by succeed, I mean have equal access to all of the same information and opportunities as non-disabled students. Another piece of advice I would say is if you would like to connect with disabled student organizations like a disability student union, if your school has one, if you like. And then finally, I recommend getting involved. So don't just go to classes, but really take advantage of all of the opportunities that being an international student will offer you, such as sports, clubs, living in student housing, volunteer in the local community. There's all sorts of opportunities that await you. And so let's go to the final slide, which has my email and website, and also a way to subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like to get updates. And I'll be happy to take questions after during the Q&A time. What I have pictured here, there's a young woman who's riding a bicycle, but it's an adaptive bicycle. Her legs are shorter, they end around the knee, and she's using a bicycle that will allow her to pedal with her legs. And so I'm sharing that as an example of some recreation that people with disabilities can get involved in, sports and recreation as well. So it's not just about studying, but taking advantage of lots of opportunities. Well, thank you. And I'd like to now invite my co-presenters, Rebecca and Christina, on screen. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So as Ashley mentioned, Christina and I are both advisors at California State University at San Bernardino. I represent the International Admissions Office, so I help students through the application process. And Christina is with our Disability Services Department, working with students as they are applying for accommodations and offering support throughout that process. So I first wanted to introduce a little bit about our university, so you know a little bit about who we are. And then Christina will speak a little bit more about the services for students with disabilities at our campus. So as you can see here at California State University at San Bernardino, we have over 20,000 students, 600 of which are international students. They represent about 50 different countries currently. We compete on the NCAA Division II athletic programs. So for any students who are considering participating in golf or basketball or things like that, that is the division that we compete in. And then in terms of our costs, you'll see there, our tuition is just above $16,000 per year, with tuition and housing totaling around $33,955. But we do offer scholarships, including scholarships specifically for international students. Our location is in San Bernardino, California. We're about an hour and a half from Los Angeles, an hour and a half from San Diego, and about 3 hours from Las Vegas. The picture that you see here is a group of students who are part of our volunteering programs. We're a very volunteer-focused campus with the majority of our students volunteering. I believe last year they volunteered over 30,000 hours. They're standing in front of the campus library, which is in front of a field, which is our campus quad. And then behind that is the San Bernardino National Forest in the San Bernardino Mountains. That area is federal protected land. So we're very fortunate that our campus is surrounded by a lot of really beautiful nature that will never be built on ever. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to show you a map here of Southern California and where we are, you'll see the red star is where our campus is. We're about 10 to 20 minutes north of downtown San Bernardino City. It's a city of about 250,000 people. And then as you can see there, Los Angeles and the Los Angeles International Airport, it's about an hour and a half away. We're about an hour and 10 minutes to the Orange County beaches, about an hour from Disneyland. And then, as we mentioned, about 3 hours up to Las Vegas. So there's a lot of different things to do in Southern California, and we hope that you take advantage of your weekends to go and explore. We'll go to the next slide. So then you'll see here a list of all of our degree programs. I'll also put a link in the chat to all of our undergraduate and all of our master's degrees. You'll see a couple of programs are marked in red. These programs are our more competitive degree programs. So we would recommend contacting the admissions office so we can identify what term you're applying for to figure out what your requirements would be for those programs. All of the other programs, you can follow the standard application process on our website. What we look at is academic credentials. So as long as you meet the minimum academic credentials and English proficiency, you'll be admitted to any of our programs. We can go to the master's degrees on the next slide. So then you'll see a list here of our 2-year master's degrees. We don't offer any PhDs, but all of these programs would be postgraduate programs after you finish a bachelor's degree, either in Japan or the United States. As you'll see across both our bachelor's and master's degree programs, we have programs in the pure sciences, health sciences, social sciences, the computer and technology sciences, education, business, as well as some fine arts and other liberal arts types of programs. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. We also offer conditional admission. So for students who would like to take English courses at our campus in place of a TOEFL, IELTS, or other English exam, we do offer coursework at the university. Undergraduate students are required to complete level 3. Graduate students have to complete level 4. We can go to the next slide. You'll see here an example of what the schedule looks like for these programs. They follow the same schedule as the university. So as soon as you finish the English program, you can then start at the university in the following semester. We'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. And I'll pass it over now to Christina.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christina Johnston. I currently serve as the Finance and Administrative Coordinator for the Office of Services to Students with Disabilities at CSUSB. We will now be discussing the services that my office provides. Please take a moment to look over the, Please take a moment to look over the agenda. We'll talk about our mission statement, disabilities defined, services and accommodations, importance of services and confidentiality. SSD empowers students by fostering skills such as self-advocacy, resourcefulness, and independence. We work with campus partners to remove environmental barriers and advocate for an inclusive campus environment where students with disabilities can thrive. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, disabilities can be separated into 2 categories, physical and mental. A physical disability is defined as a sociological disorder or condition which affects at least one of the body's systems, and mental disabilities can be separated into 2 categories, psychological or cognitive. To qualify for SSD services, the disability must substantially limit one or more major life activities. Physical disabilities can be related to vision, mobility, and hearing. Psychological disabilities are related to mental health, socialization, or behavior, and cognitive disabilities can include memory, learning, and communication. Students can apply for services by downloading an application through the SSD website and submitting it along with documentation of their disability through email at ssd@csusb.edu. Students seeking accommodation services from SSD based on a diagnosed disability or chronic health impairment must submit verifying documentation in accordance with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, ADA. Our goal as a Services to Students with Disabilities Office is to provide reasonable and appropriate accommodations for students with disabilities. Thus, students are required to provide comprehensive and current documentation of their disability whereby justifying a need for accommodation. All students substantiating documentation must be no more than 3 years old and plainly justify any assigned accommodations, reasonable accommodations, and services provided to CSUSB students must be based on a thorough assessment of the student's current limitations and the impact his or her disability will likely have on their academic performance. Once SSD receives the completed application and documentation, the student will be scheduled to meet with a disabilities counselor. Registered undergraduate students that are not enrolled in the over 60 program or through Open University will receive priority registration. SSD provides accommodations such as mobility services, sign language interpreters, real-time captionists, which are like court reporters, peer note-taking services, the Smart Pen, testing accommodations, extended time on assignments, and alternate media. It is also important to note that accommodations that students receive at their high school or community colleges may not be the same at CSUSB. The SSD office provides on-campus mobility services for students with physical limitations through 3 wheelchair-accessible carts, 1 6-passenger cart, and a van. Prior to the start of each semester, SSD staff begin recruiting peer note takers. Students also have the option of recruiting their own note taker for their services. Note takers receive priority registration for the following semester after volunteering. An SSD disability counselor can check out the Smart Pen to students registered with SSD who have Smart Pen as an approved accommodation. The Echo Smart Pen allows students to write, record, and play back audio. This is done by digitizing and syncing audio to the notes students take. By using the Echo desktop software, students can search their notes, manage their audio, and back up notebooks digitally. The pen is a versatile tool that has changed SSD students' approach to note-taking. Students using the Smart Pen take better notes and receive higher grades because they can easily review course material as needed. Testing accommodations provide an equal testing opportunity based upon the student's limitations, which include extended time, distraction-free or reduced distraction testing environments, special equipment and software, and accessible exam formats. Deaf and hard of hearing students may require ASL interpreters, real-time captionists, an FM amplification system, or the iCommunicator system. SSD staff also converts textbooks and printed instructional materials into other formats such as Adobe PDF, Word, or MP3 audio files. This service is especially important for vision impaired students and students with learning disabilities. Providing this service is important because it affords students with disabilities equal access to the educational environment. Students who are approved for alternate media are required to complete a separate intake and training before accessing this accommodation. Our services are confidential. We do not discuss our students' disabilities unless they sign a release authorizing us to do so. Parents, please note that if your student is 18 or older, we will be unable to discuss services with you unless there is a release on file allowing us to do so. Thank you for allowing us to present on disability services at CSUSB. My director, Marcy Daniels, would like to invite you all to contact our office with any questions you may have. She will also be providing written responses to the more specific questions which were provided to us before this session. Since disability services at CSUSB are so individualized and confidential, it's important for us to address them individually so the most appropriate responses are given based on your specific needs. We look forward to serving you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Christina. So I think at this point we are transitioning over to the Q&A. So I will be asking questions of Christina and Ashley, and they will be jumping in and answering questions accordingly. If you have any questions, feel free to put those questions in the Q&A section here on the Zoom session, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. So the first question that we had was a specific case of a student with a disability in their eyes, and asking about the eligibility and the ability for them to study at a university for a master's degree. So Christina or Ashley, if you guys would like to speak a little on that, I'd also be happy to jump in as well.
I can definitely start us off. So we welcome all students to apply for our universities, regardless if it's CSUSB or another university in the United States. We welcome, any student with a disability. The one thing about applying for schools in the United States is that students don't disclose that they have a disability during the application process, because we want to make sure that the admissions process is based on the students' academics, not necessarily their disability or their nationality or these different more specific, I'm at a loss for a word, but it's not based on your disability whether or not you can be admitted to the university. And that's also because it's a student's right to disclose that they have a disability, and not all students may want to disclose that they have a disability during the application process, because even as far as we have came, I think as a country, as the human race, there are still some, biases, and the application process, we want to make sure that there are no biases during that admissions process. Rebecca or Ashley, if either one of you want to add more.
This is Ashley. Yes, I'd like to add something. I would say that, your question is, should I talk about my disability in the application process? Christina said it's a choice, which I think is a really good point. Some students choose not to, which is valid. You have a lot of reasons to choose not to. However, I will say that a lot of students do choose to disclose in their application as a way, maybe because it's part of their identity and it's something that's really important in their lives. For example, a lot of applications will ask some kind of question like, what makes you stand out? What are some things that are important to you? What have been some challenges in your life that you've worked through? And so if you'd like to talk about your disability as part of that, that's an option, but you don't have to. And either way, like Christina was saying, that should not be a factor for whether you get accepted or not. It might just be additional information that will help the university learn more about you. But people choose to disclose or to not disclose for different reasons, and there's no wrong way to do it.
And this is Rebecca, just to jump in on this question a little bit as well, from kind of an admission standpoint. For admissions advisors, what we look at in an application is the student's academic credentials. How are you as a student? Are you prepared to go on to the level of education that you are looking to go into? And so for our campus, as an example, in our computer and data science departments, our faculty, make the final decision on the applications, and they do ask for a one-page statement of purpose for a student to talk about their experiences, to talk about why they want to go on to higher studies at this time. And so if part of your story of getting to this place where you're ready to go on to a master's degree in a STEM field is your disability and your journey through that, it's wonderful to write about that, because that's a part of who you are. And the faculty want to know who you are in the application. But that's not going to make a decision of yes or no for them. The big thing that they're going to be looking at is your academics. Are you a good student? Do you have everything that you need to be ready? And then also then who you are and where you want to go from here. So then we have a question here asking about scholarships for students with disabilities. I think maybe breaking this down between general scholarships and some tips for students with disabilities in terms of applying for those scholarships, and then also looking for any specific resources for scholarships that are targeted for students with disabilities.
So I know in general, there's a lot of scholarships that are offered to the general, student body population, not just through the school, but also through different community resources. And there's a lot of stuff out there. If you use the internet to, search these things, there's a lot of options out there. Always be careful what you're applying for. Make sure you don't, give any credit card information or anything like that. Because I'll be honest, there's some people out there, but in general, there's a lot of scholarship opportunities. You just have to look for them. For students with disabilities specific, there are scholarship opportunities out there that require you to have a disability to apply for this scholarship. Our office created a scholarship guide for students with disabilities that lists, I think it's about 20 different scholarships that are out there specific for students with disabilities. They each have their own different requirements, deadlines, and information. But what's really nice is we've published that scholarship guide on our website. So if you go to our Services Students with Disabilities website, and I'll be sure to drop that in the chat in just a few moments, you can find the scholarship guide there and see if any of those scholarships would be appropriate for you. And if that's the disability that you have, a lot of those deadlines have passed for this academic year, but definitely for, the next academic year, those items would open back up. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat and give my counterparts an opportunity to respond as well.
This is Ashley. That sounds like a great guide, Christina. One thing that I would warn international students or potential prospective international students about, a lot of the scholarships that are the disability specific scholarships that I'm aware of have a US citizenship or US residency requirement. So definitely make sure that you're eligible as someone coming from another country to the United States before you apply. And my advice, honestly, to international students with disabilities would be, don't rely on disability-specific scholarships to get you where you are. Just apply for the same scholarships as the other students are applying for. Just like we had talked about, sharing a little bit about yourself in your college admissions application, the same question applies in your scholarship application. Sometimes they'll ask questions about why should we award you a scholarship, and what have been some, tell us about something in your life that makes you different, or that shows that you are a hard worker, persistent, or whatever that might be. So that would be my advice, is to don't put all your time into searching for disability specific scholarships. Just apply for whatever you can find, and know that you have those options available also.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm very happy that you further explained that, because honestly, I didn't even consider that, and you're very right. Don't just look for disability scholarships. And in the guide, I'm not 100% sure that there is a US residency requirement for them or not. So when you do take a look at that guide, keep that in mind when you're checking it out.
Perfect. I'm going to just jump in with just one or two little things when we're talking about scholarships, because I know this is really, really important for a lot of students in terms of figuring out financially how this will work. And any type of money that you can get from a school is always great. Most universities will publish on their website a list of all of their scholarships. So their Disability Services Center may have a scholarship list. Do look for that, but then also look for the university scholarship list. Sometimes they'll put the disability scholarships in that list. Sometimes it will be just the larger general scholarships, but you will want to kind of explore all of the different types of awards, all the different requirements for all of them. Some of our scholarships at our university, for example, are program specific. So like the biology program has a list of scholarships specifically for biology students, and business has a list of scholarships. And then we have international scholarships that are specifically for students who are not from California. So you'll want to apply to everything that you think you may qualify for. If you don't qualify, they will tell you, they'll say no, and that's okay. But if they do say yes, and they accept you for a scholarship, you know, that's always the best kind of surprise to find. So do make sure that you look both for that general campus scholarship list for any school that you're considering, as well as specific scholarships in the disabilities office.
And of course, don't forget to, since you already know EducationUSA, you might also be familiar with State Department sponsored programs and scholarships like the Fulbright Award and other State Department opportunities. And the State Department is really committed to ensuring that people with disabilities are part of these different types of experiences. So they'll often work with applicants who receive those scholarships to make sure that they have the financial assistance that they need from case to case, from country to country.
I'm so glad you mentioned Fulbright because it's a fabulous program. If you have a chance to meet with your EducationUSA advisors at your local EducationUSA office, talk to them about Fulbright and other funding opportunities because there's just such a wide range of different things and it's all available to you. So looking at this next question here, we have a question about does a university help students find local pharmacies and medical facilities that they may need while they're in the United States?
Typically, the Services Students with Disabilities office on campus won't initially help with those things, but once you get registered for our services, we are definitely open to helping to identify, you know, different resources that you may need that, you know, don't necessarily come from the school specifically. A lot of our students at CSUSB, they have that conversation with their counselors to say, this is what's going on. This is what I'm looking for. Can you help me? We're always open to helping and trying to identify things for you. But one of the big things is you have to let us know what's going on. So if you're needing something, communicate that with your counselor. And I mean, I can only speak for my own office. I can't speak for everyone, but we have some really great counselors who are just committed to ensuring that your experience at CSUSB and in California, if that's where you choose to, you know, study, is a good one. So definitely, if you're needing assistance finding resources, talk to the counselor, let them know what's going on, and I'm sure they would be able to, you know, help you find items.
I'll jump in on this just a little bit as well, as I've done advising for international students and helped with assistance in terms of like their health insurance and things like that. Typically, universities will have an orientation program when you come to campus and will typically include the health insurance company that you'll be enrolling in while you're in the US. So that way you have health insurance in the US and maybe other medical services. So a lot of times they'll bring the campus health clinic to the orientation so you can meet with the health administrators, whether it is a nurse. Some larger universities have doctors that are on campus as well. If it has a medical school, it may be an even larger facility. It just depends. But a lot of students will utilize a health center for some of their health needs, but then also during that orientation program, they'll talk about local health facilities, whether it is clinics, doctors' offices, hospitals, pharmacies, where you'll be able to utilize those resources. And as Christina mentioned, with a disabilities access department at a university, we don't know that you have a disability until you register with the disabilities office. So you'll want to make sure that you do that when you come to the campus for the orientation and all of that, so you can get connected with a counselor, and then they can help assist with other accommodations that you might need. So, you know, we might be able to provide information at the orientation about where the pharmacy is, but then if you need assistance in terms of how to navigate to get to the pharmacy, that will be a collaboration between the international office and the disabilities office to give you the information that you'll need to do that. So those are just some considerations. If you take medications, and in terms of traveling with the medications initially when you come to the US, you will want to take a look at with TSA in terms of what medications can come over the border into the United States, what medications may be completely banned. That way you can talk with your doctor in your home country initially in terms of if a medication is not going to be able to be prescribed in the US, what is an alternative that I can take while I'm in the US? What can I carry into the US? Those types of things. That way you at least have maybe the first 30 days in terms of prescription medications that you need before you have a new doctor and have a new prescription while you're in the United States. So then we have a question here about studying for a master's degree and then transferring credits towards a master's degree. So I'll quickly just speak on this a little bit from an admission standpoint. At our university, our master's degree programs will accept up to 12 credits of master's coursework from a university that is not our university. We want to make sure that you are doing at least half of your program at our university before we confer the degree to you. So they do limit it at 12. We would have to take a look at the university that you took these credits to see if they qualify, if we have the same accreditations, credentials, rankings, that they're equal and equivalent types of coursework. So that is something, as you start exploring the university, feel free to reach out to my office or the admissions office of the university that you're considering with a copy of your transcript so we can see the institution's information to see how the credits may potentially transfer. And then let's see here, we have a question about how do you provide documentation for your disability when you're registering for disability services? If it's in a foreign language, what types of translations potentially, or what would you kind of be looking for when a student registers?
That is a great question. And that is actually a question that I don't have a great answer to, so I apologize. But as I mentioned during my presentation, my director is committed to ensuring, that you receive the best information possible. So I will definitely get with her to get a more written response for this question. What I can say is that if you do submit something that's in another language, we as an office, we're really committed to assisting students. So I can't imagine that we wouldn't try to find some type of way to, accommodate that your, documentation is in another language. But again, I don't want to, speak specifically because I just hate giving bad information. So I'll definitely ask my director to provide a written response for that on how that process works, what you should look out for, and those different policies and guidelines that we have to follow under that ADA and the different legalities that we have. But I'll get a written response for you.
This is Ashley. Yeah, we would, MyUSA, we would probably recommend getting reports, whether it's, an audiogram or a visual vision assessment or whatever your documentation might be. If you can get it translated into English where possible, then that would definitely be an advantage. However, I did want to add that there's kind of a growing movement among disability services offices across the US that we're starting to see a trend where they're trying to remove some of the burden of proof and documentation off of students. And so, it's going to depend on which university it is. Some will require, have very strict requirements about what kinds of documentation they accept. Others might be going towards this this trend of, well, we're not going to make you submit X, Y, and Z. Instead, let's have a conversation and you tell us what you need, and we'll see if we can make that work, even if you don't have a piece of paper or something that says that. So I know it can really vary a lot depending on which institution. Those are great questions. Thank you, everybody.
So thank you, Christina, Rebecca, and Ashley for wonderful presentation. We learned a lot. I mean, even myself learned a lot from your presentation. Let me switch to Japanese and share my 少々お待ちください。先ほど、皆様からのプレゼンテーションの中でも、お話に出ていた ADA の、障害を持つアメリカ人法が2020年に、成立してから、30周年ということで、アメリカ大使館の方ではさまざまなイベントを、昨年から行っております。11月の4日には、インクルーシブな障害者雇用の実現に向けてということでオンラインレクチャーが開催されますので、ぜひこちらの方もご参加ください。また、11月15日には、EducationUSA のイベントとして、車椅子インフルエンサーの中島涼子さん、アメリカで映画を学んでいらっしゃったんですけれども、中島さんをお招きして留学経験談を伺う予定になっておりますので、ぜひこちらのセッションにも参加をしていただければと思います。アメリカは多様性を重んじて、インクルージョンの推進にさまざまな教育現場だけでなく、職場も含めて、推進に取り組んでおります。今日のセッションからも、障害はあくまでも、一つの自分のアイデンティティの一つというお話がありましたけれども、そういうふうに捉えられているということがすごくよく分かったんではないかなと思います。本日遅い時間まで起きてセッションに対応してくださいました、アシュリーさん、クリスティーナさん、レベッカさんに大きな拍手を皆さん多分心の中でしていると思いますが、ありがとうございました。また今日、通訳を、提供してくださった通訳の皆様にも感謝申し上げます。また字幕のサービスを提供してくださった皆様にも感謝申し上げます。本日のセッションが皆様の、お役に少しでも立てていれば幸いです。それでは、アメリカの皆さんは良い夜を、日本の皆様は良い一日をお過ごしください。ありがとうございました。
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.